two things happen. They either get marginalized, like let's say someone like Audrey McLaughlin, who is the next woman? Alexa McDonough, who I think is a better example because I don't think Audrey McLaughlin was really that strong a leader. But Alexa McDonough was a very strong leader, but she wanted to do things in a more collegial way. She wanted to do things differently. And as a result, she was marginalized and made fun of. Right? So it's only if you're a woman in the system, and I've experienced this as well, if you're a woman in the system, the only way you get taken seriously is if you act like a man. You know, if you're the kind of leader that they think is a leader, which is very much a type A leader. And even though now we have all kinds of scholarship in business schools that say the most effective leader is not a type A leader. The most effective leader in business is a emotionally intelligent leader, right? Is a leader who's empathetic, who understands people, who, you know, there's tons of evidence of this now. That type A leadership is not effective leadership. Because, you know, just think about it. If you're a parent, and I don't mean you're a parent or you're a child, maybe you're more children than parents still, but I don't mean that in a negative way, but you know what I mean. You know, if you're an authoritarian parent, there's only two ways that kids deal with an authoritarian parent. They either rebel or they lie. Does anybody actually do what the parent wants them to do? Only if they're not very bright, you know? So it's the same thing, right? It's like if you have an authoritarian leader, you either rebel or you lie. And that's the way our politics is. So every once in a while we have a rebellion, which I think is great. And right now I think we're working up to one. You know, the last one we had was, real one we had was in the 60s, and I think we're working up to one like that now. Or you know, adapt, right? You adapt. And so, you know, I think rebelling is better than adapting, but I think in that rebellion we have to follow a wisdom which I haven't followed most of my life, and that is a wonderful lesbian feminist black poet from the United States called Audre Lorde. She's dead now. She said, "You will never dismantle the master's house with the master's tools." And you know, I remember the discussion we had on Friday where people were saying, well, we have to be credible to our enemies. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I think we have to be professional, and I think one of the strengths of CAP is a professional quality of everything we do. I think we have to look like we know what we're doing, you know. I think we have to know our facts. I think we have to, you know, produce quality materials, all of that. But I don't think we have to be credible to the people we're fighting against. I think we have to be credible to the people we're organizing, you know. And I think that's what CAP achieved with the Facebook site. That Facebook site wasn't credible to the media at first. I saw it the second day. I knew it was going to be amazing. Because I understand movement. The media doesn't know anything about movement, and neither do politicians anymore, because I haven't seen one in a long time. Okay? I haven't seen it, but that's my, I was going to say stock and trade, but it's more my lifeblood, right? So I recognize it, right? I recognize it when I see it, and that's what that was, what you achieved, right? Was the beginnings of a movement. And in order to keep that going, you have to keep your eyes on the people you're trying to organize and the people you're talking to, not to the politicians, right? Not yet, anyway. Because you have to organize in order to move. And I think, I think we have to think in terms of transformation, not just in terms of little fixes anymore. The system doesn't work. The democratic system does not work. And the only way to get people involved in a way that's going to change it is through more and regular participation of citizens in the system. Not just being more informed. That's important. I agree with you there. Because the lack of knowledge on our political system, that's the only way they got away with that prorogation last time, you know, a year ago, was because of people's ignorance about our political system, right? So, you know, Harper could say it's a Canadian coup, and people actually bought that. Whereas, you know, coalition governments are so common in parliamentary democracy. We're about the only country that doesn't have them. Us in England, right? Like really, the Anglo-Saxon countries are the most backward countries in terms of our political institution. But no one No one is less democratic than Canada. That's my opinion. No one in the Western world. Like basically the British system, even though we're based on the British system, if you're an MP in the British system, you can vote against your government on everything except the platform it ran on. In Canada, you can't, you know? So Canada is less democratic than Britain, less democratic than the United States, even though it doesn't always appear that way. So yes, we have to change the institutions, but it's much more important in my view. And if we're gonna get more women in power and more women interested in politics, we have to change the way politics is practiced. And that's the most important thing. And so I really invite you to study some of the institutions. So I talked about, and I can't get into it now because I want to stop so we can have dialogue. Participatory budgeting is one. Citizens' assemblies have been very, very useful. Constitutional change is used all over Latin America as a way to engage ordinary citizens, and it worked here in Canada too. Now, you know, their idea is it didn't work because they lost. But what worked was more people were involved and engaged in politics than had ever happened in my lifetime. Like people got, you know, Mulroney mailed the Charlottetown Accord to every home. And people would come to meetings, like be meetings, I spoke at meetings all over the country, packed to the rafters. And this is, you know, the media was going, who cares? Canadians are bored, our eyes are glassing over, who cares about constitutional change, right? Just like they said, who cares about proroguing, right? But people were so into it, it was amazing, absolutely amazing, you know, and they'd come with index cards, and they'd come with their Charlottetown Accord, all marked up with questions, right? And it was the most engaged I've ever seen people in politics, was that process. And so I think the two things that are meaningful in terms of citizens' engagement, the two principles are, one, it has to be decision-making, not just consulting. Because just consulting leads to cynicism, because they never listen. And ultimately, the only way they listen is if you have enough political power to force them to listen. But they never listen very rarely do they just, you know, I mean, I've seen it happen once in my whole life, that we actually convinced a politician to change her mind, and that was Kim Campbell. Once, in a meeting. And then the second thing is people, so one is there has to be decision-making involved, not just consultation. And the second thing is, I forgot. What's the second thing? Anyway, okay. Yeah, decision-making and a process, a good process where people can speak their minds. And those two things are very important. And the more local it is, the better. Which isn't to say you can't have local processes with federal politics, you can. And so now we have in Latin America, and I think the most advanced processes are probably in Venezuela and Bolivia, but they're also in Brazil. You have citizens' assemblies, constitutional states, constituent assemblies. You know, in Brazil, they had a constituent assembly on the Constitution. It was 50% women, 40% indigenous. No, 60% indigenous and 70% indigenous in the country. 40% women. 40% peasants, because that's reflective of the country. And it was amazing, amazing to see it, just amazing. And they came up with, you look at the Bolivian Constitution, if you go on my blog, I have a link to it. It's like unbelievable, like it's like dreaming in Technicolor to have a constitution like that. Real equality, all kinds of institutions of democratic participation. I mean, it's just amazing. And also Venezuela did that with a constituent assembly, with a constitution as a way. And this is people who have been illiterate before, and actually use the Constitution as a way to teach people how to read also. Right? So those processes are very important. And